I'm going to talk about the international environment very quickly. Most of the stuff on the international environment is not really mine as per se. I'm a South African economist, so I'm focusing more on the South African stuff. So I'll just give you a quick overview, and then I'm going to talk about some myths about South Africa, because I think we hear too much of the myths. And part of that is the debt part, which you bankers are involved with. So I thought in taxes, then I'm going to talk about vanity, because that's very important. I'm going to talk about sanity, which is even more important, and reality, which it is actually. And then, the public transport industry is gone. Sorry, that's not part of this. And then I'll just give you a summary, doing some sectors where they are. What we know about the world economy right now is it is growing at quite a pace. And it is really being upgraded by most institutions, be it the IMF or the World Bank, in the main, at least for last year and this year. And it's the first time in many years that this has happened. Normally, growth forecasts were downgraded by the organ, so let's call it the official forecasters of the world, the IMF and the World Banks, and so on. But here you can see the advanced economies; they've been growing at over 2%. The emerging markets, they've been doing quite well, to a large extent led by China, but these days more and more India. India is growing faster than China in the last while, and that's probably not that surprising, I guess, but India is coming from a much lower base. So if you were to compare India to China, a guy in China, is 10 times richer than the guy in India. The guy in China is also now richer than us, by about a quarter or so. So we've now fallen behind the Chinese, if you wish. Not that we got poorer, but we didn't get richer quite as quickly as the Chinese. But the emerging markets are not just Asia. If you go and look at some of the stuff that's happening in Eastern Europe, or places in Africa that we don't always think about, like Ethiopia, Rwanda, more on, I would say now, on the East Coast, the part of Africa that was not that enticed by commodities. So you find a Kenya maybe growing at 3.5%, but you find a Uganda and a Rwanda growing a lot faster. But it's certainly a lot better on that side of the continent, the growth, I think, than in the Angolas and in the Nigeria and so on. They were very heavily reliant on oil. Others, like us, we were heavily reliant on other commodities. So if we look at that, and we look at Latin America, they've had a good growth year or so as well. A little while ago, Brazil was in really deep trouble. They've actually busy jailing their third president. We first got to do our first one. They had the biggest recession in 104 years, so it was really tough for them. But they've got out of that. Looks like Argentina has turned the corner. Chile's had a good growth performance. You go to old Eastern Europe, but they now call it Central Europe, has been doing quite well, thank you. And it's been an amazing, journey for many of these emerging markets. And if you look at emerging markets, they're about 60% of the world's economy and about 80% of the world's population. That's just, big numbers. That's just giving you an idea. So the advanced economies are really only got 20% of the world's population, but they've got 40% of the world's value. And it's no longer the big place of the world, but they're still very important. And the two areas that are very important in them are the two big markets are America and Europe in the world. And here I mean the EU, as it is now. And you can see that for the first time in probably a decade, we had very strong business confidence both in America and in Europe. And that probably led to that higher growth. Europe is coming down now. I think other areas of business confidence is just turning the corner, and it's starting to head down a bit. We're seeing Chinese growth, for example, slow as well. They've gone down to about 6.5% growth, which is not a train smash, but it's very slow for China, and they don't expect to go too much above that in the next while. But the point that I want to make is we're probably right now more or less at the peak of world growth that we're going to have for the next while. And I think the confidence layers are starting to unravel slightly. It doesn't mean that world growth is going to come crashing down, but the sort of 3.7, 3.8% growth is probably going to fall back closer to 3.3 or 3.2 in the next year or two. Maybe not quite next year. And part of that happens to be that the US interest rate cycle is on its way up. Very important. That means it becomes more difficult for others to lower interest rates as well, unless you're willing to live with a lower currency. Chinese growth, all those sort of things. But I think there are other areas where it's a concern, like Brexit. It's got to come next year. We don't even know, the British public doesn't even know what the thing of Brexit is going to be on the 29th of March next year, neither do the Europeans. And generally, the world grew together with trade. So if you look at what we have in trade around the world, we've got the most, trade now makes up the most of GDP that it ever did on a worldwide scale. And it really, there's no thing like, other than maybe North Korea, a country that can live with the rest, without the rest of the world. You look at the cell phone in your pocket, it's probably made in something like 20 countries. The car that you're driving is probably made in 180 countries. You don't realize it, but all the parts come from all various parts of the world and are put together in another country or here, and then you buy a car. And you're not buying a car that says made in South Africa, you're buying a car that's got a brand that says it's a Mercedes, or it's a Volkswagen, or a Toyota. And by the way, if you want to know who makes the most cars today in the world, it's also an interesting fact, and who buys the most is the Chinese. So out of the about 97 million cars, just out of very quick interest, that the world makes, 27 million of them are made in China. China produces the same amount of cars that we do in a week, which we do in a year. So it's a very, very different thing. But here, this is where I'm a bit concerned about, and this is the trade growth. This is the quickest picture we get. I updated. It's just come out, the latest figures. This will be for June. These are the 85 biggest harbors vis-a-vis containers in the world. So they count all the containers in all these harbors. We do the same in South Africa. So Durban is our major container harbor. They do Durban. They do 4 harbors in Africa, for example. And they do Nairobi, and in Morocco they do one. Not sure where the other one is. But Rotterdam and London and Shanghai and so on will all be part of this. And you could see that there was quite a good growth, and then we went through a bit of a slowdown period. But now, with all these tariff talk and the possibility of a trade war, and I'll go through that now, there's been a slowdown. At least the sentiment is probably impacted on people just going to trade ever more. And this is a very nice thing. It's a bit rough around the edges, but it's a very quick way of finding out how world trade is doing. And you get it within about 3 weeks after a month end, and many policy makers use it. So if you look at this, the world trade in goods was in 2016 $15 trillion US. That's huge. You can talk about the South African economy. We are 350 billion US. We've fit into that something like 40 times. So the trade of the world is very big. And if you then got a 50 billion tariff slapped on China by the Americans, in the bigger picture it's small. But the Chinese hit back with another 50 billion. And then the Americans have a 200 billion thing on China, and they just somehow throw their stuff at the Europeans with iron and aluminium and steel and everything like that. And then they want to include the motor cars, and pretty soon you're at 600, 700, 800, maybe even $1 trillion. And then it becomes meaningful. Apart from the sentiment that is where people start saying, but should I really go and look at America, or should an American go and look at other places too? Is my product not going to get hit? Shouldn't I wait for this trade war of words to just go over a bit? So obviously it impacts on the sidelines and on the edges. It's probably impacting sentiment as well of business people. But nonetheless, it is the one big danger, I think, that we're living through today. And even if you like Mr. Trump, let me just say one thing. I'm not anti-Trump or against Trump or for Trump. I'm just saying anybody that stops the world trade is going to put us back to where we were in the 1920s. We had that then. We saw the results. World trade was much higher as a percentage of world GDP. In 2013, before the war, there was a time period in the war when there was no trade because everything was blown up. And then it started off again, but people quickly clamped down on it. And when they did so, we ended up with the Great Depression. And today, if you really think about it, the efficiencies that world trade bring, because that guy that makes you your phone is not looking for the worst product. He's looking for the best product. He's looking for the best product for the best price. And the same when you go into a car. Imagine you could only buy one car. So it brings choice. It brings many, many things. I mean, if we only had one bank and there was nothing that the bank would charge us what they wanted. And the same with the country. If you actually think about it, just think of things like medicines. Do we make all the medicines? No. We import most medicines, and if not, when we do make them, we import the components. And even the cars we make here, we have to import. We had for a while, I don't know about now, but we didn't have a ball bearing factory. So, you need ball bearings to put a wheel in motion. So these are the things that are very, very important, and I think that's something. I'm just going to talk very quickly about the commodity cycle. It's more my background. If we look at the currencies around the world of emerging markets, you'll see that in 2011, when the commodity cycle hit its peak, and you go and look at those emerging markets, Turkey and Argentina have a severe political problem as well. And you could argue Brazil, Russia, and South Africa have a bit of a political problem as well. But Argentina, Brazil, Russia, South Africa, Indonesia, Mexico, Chile, and Poland are at least very big commodity producers. Turkey is very close to all the oil producers. They have some pipelines running through. So you could argue it's semi a commodity currency as well. India probably isn't, but that says to me, if you look at the bottom, let's say 9 or 10, then only 2 of them are not commodity producers, whose currencies have had a fall. And if you look at the manufacturing index of the world, if you wish, China, Thailand, Philippines, Poland is a bit of a coal exporter and so on, but they're also becoming. You can see that's where currencies declined the least against the dollar. So the one thing that we mustn't forget is that when currencies fall, they fall to protect those people that export a lot of commodities. And the commodity cycle at the moment is against us, the long-term one. And it's going to take a while. It's probably only going to turn after 2022, even after 2026. But it'll flatten out before then, I hope. But that's the one thing. So currencies are going to be under pressure for those, if you wish. And here you can just see why I say so. As American interest rates move up, typically your Chicago Research Bureau, which is the commodity index the Americans use, sort of declines. And those interest rates at the moment are heading up. You guys are in the banking world. You've probably heard that the Fed is talking interest rates up the whole time. It's all about how much speed they're going to put on the interest rates. And they're still negative. So America has a little bit of inflation. The interest rates don't make up for inflation there. And once that starts to happen, I think commodity prices are going to be low. And commodities, there are always exceptions. Let me just give you an idea or two. If you go back right now, you'll find wheat is about 10 or 20% more than it was in 1970. But just a year ago, wheat, in nominal dollar terms, cost you less than in 1970, or in fact in 1965. Yeah, because it's up and down. So that's a big exception. But you could go to the other case and point and say, last year, rare earth metals went up through the roof, despite the commodity cycle coming down, but they're not measured as part of it because they're very small in nature. And today, lithium. You cannot buy lithium or cobalt very cheaply at the moment. Yeah, cobalt prices have come down but from a high. They've probably lost a third of their value, but that's still up, on 3 years ago, it's still up 40, 50%, or whatever the case may be. So ultimately there are exceptions, but in general, commodity prices are likely to stay under pressure. And the reason is, if interest rates in America are low, it costs, and that normally leads to the world rate cycle, it costs people less to hoard commodities. When it starts costing people a bit more to hoard commodities, they'd rather put their money in the bank. So that's one of the things that happens. The other thing is, when interest rates go up, the growth slows down a little bit, so people need less of a commodity. So the commodities are the big swing factor in this whole picture. The one lucky thing is that the biggest import commodity for South Africa has also started to decline. Just there you see it. I don't know where we are going to be, but I was thinking 2 weeks ago, still 20 cents up for petrol, but now it looks in single figures, 2-3 cents up. Diesel probably about 9 cents down a litre. This isn't all. This is also a crook spill because it's a cartel. And the cartel doesn't normally hold this long. So we are getting to nearer the end of the cartel where they start fighting and cheating and all those sort of things. And I'm quite sure that's what's going to happen. I think that leads me to South Africa. And because we're still a commodity exporter, about, under normal circumstances, I could argue around 60% of our exports are commodities when, say, commodities are a sort of normal price. And with that, I don't mean just gold and platinum and coal and iron ore. Yes, those are our big commodities, but in a good year, we also export food crops, like maize and the like. And we also have manufactured commodities, like steel is a manufactured commodity, and that's 1 or 2% of our exports, depending on where the price is. So ultimately, when you look at the bigger thing, and the same with chrome and the like, and we are very linked, and many of our neighbors, like Zambia and Zimbabwe, are linked to commodities too. And some of them are linked to other types of commodities we don't always think about. But for example, we have uranium, but a bigger uranium exporter than us, I believe these days, is Namibia. So, the people that we trade with around us, and they're not maybe our biggest trade partners, but they do play a role in our ability to export manufactured products, are also commodity producers, so it impacts on our manufacturing as well. But let's just have a look. Our per capita growth, I look at this, and this is where the world average is. We have become richer. Let me just make this clear. South Africans are about 12 or 15% richer in purchase power parity dollar terms, they say to us, than we were in 1990. The problem is the rest of the world has got much richer faster, or the world in general, and particularly the Chinese and now the Indians. And you can see here we were about 10% richer, now we are about 20% poorer than the world as such. So we are slowly lagging, and you can see where we kept up with the world was during the commodity boom. We sort of stayed level, if I can call it that. Once the commodity boom ended, yes, there was also the Great Recession of 2009, and 2011 it was its son, and we also had a very weak government then. We had a government that was led, quite frankly, by a crook. And ultimately, that's what it boils down to. You end up with destroying business confidence. You end up people looking more to invest overseas, and other people want to invest here. That's the one thing. But I want to talk also about some positive aspects that we don't think about. And I'm talking now to bankers. So let's talk about debt. Bank is not worried about what I'm going to put in the bank. If I'm a depositor, I'm not really that big in the bank's books, quite frankly. I'm really big in the bank's books if I lend money from the bank. Am I right? And that's where the big thing is. So when we hear in The Economist magazine and in the FM how bad our household debt is Well, it's not really that bad. Yes, these countries down here are richer. Richer people can afford more debt. The social sort of countries, Netherlands, Denmark, and so on, they also have cradle to grave. So you have a pension fund system. So if I go to my bank and I say I'm 75 and I want to borrow and I want to buy a new house, I think you're going to laugh at me. Am I right? It's part of the criteria. I have to be young, 23, and a multimillionaire to be able to afford the house, and everything like that. But ultimately, here it doesn't matter, because the guy's got an income from the state forever and a day. But, you know, I looked the other day, we're not that far off from Greece or from Lisbon. If you look at the UBS earnings around the globe sort of thing, we're certainly also, Chile's just surpassed us, San Diego, so Poland has surpassed us, Latvia not. But if you look at that, we're not out of sync, debt to household income. We really are not out of sync. So we must also remember there's something called people on the other side, like debt collectors or debt counselors or debt advisors, and they've got an interest into telling us how bad it is. So they love those stories being published, because it means when the client comes to them, the client doesn't feel it's something unusual to go to, which it isn't in any society, to go and seek advice about their debt. The client feels that this is a problem for everyone, so they're more likely to go and seek help. But also it helps keep them in the eye for their companies, you know, so they say so-and-so from Debt Busters and this from Debt Counselors International or whatever. It's a marketing exercise. Because look here, I'll prove it even further. This is the Reserve Bank debt to household income. In 2007-8 we peaked at 88% virtually. We're now at 71% sort of. It's gone up slightly in the second quarter. It will maybe go up more because this second quarter, because the government salary increases are delayed. They only took place now in July, and that's about 27% of our total salaries paid in the formal sector. But that will come down still. I don't think it's going to change. I don't think there's growth. I know there's no growth above inflation in the household debt market at the moment. So I think we're going to see this figure slightly go down, and I don't see it turning before we get to under 69%. We are now at a 12-year low sort of with this number, which says to you that the problem was much bigger in the past. Do you agree with me? And at the moment the problem is being addressed. So I just sometimes wonder about headlines. Here's another one. You wouldn't be sitting here at the Institute of Bankers if it wasn't for our pension fund assets. Do you realize that? I'll tell you why. We have the fifth biggest, I didn't put Iceland here, fifth biggest pension fund assets to GDP in the world. Yeah. And we have, the even bigger wow is, the eighth biggest in nominal dollar terms. So here's a big kitty that you can go and steal if you're the Guptas. If you're the Russians and you want to sell somebody nuclear, you know they can afford it. But I think the big story is here for me is not necessarily the pension story but just think of this. We always talk about how low our savings are, but we've forgotten that economics looks at savings as something that's left over from expenditure. Yet if you put your money in a unit trust, you're spending. Okay? And if you put your money in a pension, it's spending. And part of your pension, you don't even see as part of your salary, per se, because when I worked at Transnet, for example, those were ups and downs and jumps, but ultimately you've got 15%, they say, is your pension that you son, but 7.5% the company pays for you. You don't even see it on your pay sheet. I understand Eskom and government is the same. I'm sure many of the banks around the table have a similar thing where the company pays. So that doesn't even go into consumption, doesn't go into to consumer spend, because the company, remember, has put that aside into the pension for you. And if you look at that, it tells you something else. this money, who are the big depositors very often at the banks? Who gives banks money? Is the wholesale funding. Now that's the difference between some banking sectors that are sort of more advanced, like South Africa, and others that have to rely only on the retail side. So your pension funds, your unit trusts, and so on, are putting that wholesale funding there. It also helps the government because they buy government bonds. We have a debt market. It also makes the JSE the 17th biggest equity market in the world because, yes, there are foreigners that are now 40% owners, but the pension funds are 25% owners. And if it wasn't for the money from the pension funds, a lot of these companies wouldn't have been here. In fact, some of the banks wouldn't have been here. So maybe somebody should just tell Mr. Julius Malema, for example, if you want to nationalize everything and so on, the bonds that the banks hold are also held by the pension funds. The pension funds have 16.5 million accounts, which represent about 12 million adults. All right, so you're going to take more money away from black people because the majority of them will be black by the very nature of our statistics, because the maximum number of adults, I'm talking just adults, will be 3 million white adults. That's if everyone had a pension fund, which is also not true. So if you look at that and you look at the assets of that, it's a very big difference that you have to think about. And you have to say to yourself, wait a minute, never mind houses. Houses are also, majority of houses in South Africa, 63% of our population or our households have houses. It's one of the top 40 in the world. Now you want to take that away. Guess what? 56% of the value of houses belongs to black Africans, and only 32% belongs to whites. And this is in 2016 numbers. It changes about 1% every year in the direction, so whites become less. And if you look at the number of houses, blacks have more. And you can do this as well. You can take houses, 3 million RDP houses, and give it to the people. You can take 1.6 million traditional houses, just do the admin, and you can transfer that with title deeds to people. Have you ever been in Bushbuck Ridge? Who's been to Bushbuck Ridge before?
Yeah, I've been there.
You've been there?
Yeah.
You know that's where Tuscan houses come from?
Is that so?
Yes. They built the first Tuscan houses in the world. This is a true story. And Pretoria East copied it, and the Italians copyrighted it. So, I'm kidding, obviously, but the point that I want to make, you drive through about 40 kilometers of house, am I right?
Yeah.
And even our ex-president didn't have his house. Nakanda doesn't belong to him. He only has PTO, permission to occupy.
Yeah.
So it also becomes more difficult to transfer something like that from intergenerational.
Yeah.
So this is something that we've got to think of and think differently. But maybe someone should tell Mr. Malema, if you are going to take all the land, you're going to do Eugene de Blanche a very big favor, and Eugene de Blanche has already told me in a dream that Julius Malema is his best child that he's ever trained. Okay, but now on the more positive side that we don't always think about, we have other assets, and this is just a very simple one. It's cars or total vehicles. Now, obviously there are trucks and minibuses and buckies in here, but if you just look at vehicles, just normal passenger cars, we've gone from about 3.1 million to about 7.5 million in a very, very short 20-year time span. That's why we have traffic jams.
Yeah.
So the wealth in South Africa is widely spread, more wider than we think. And it's an amazing thing. And if it wasn't for this as well, I understand banks don't finance cars anymore. Instead, I think they should finance only bicycles. It'll keep everybody a bit more, stable and everything like that. And here you can see our net wealth from the central bank. The one includes our financial wealth, which is our pension fund and direct shares. And then the other one, and about half of it is our houses. And then just that little difference shows you the other thing. And this excludes things like people's cattle that they would have or stuff like that. So it would only include stuff that they can give a value to, generally like cars. So our salaries haven't gone anywhere. Our pensioners are doing okay. They're only about 11% of our spend. In fact, a bit less. They are 11% of the spend of salaries. So ultimately, our pensioners, for some other reason, either they're drawing down quicker because the JSE hasn't performed well, but they've been doing, that's the red line. The black line here is the people with salaries. Now, these are real salaries after the rate of inflation has been taken away. And I would say to you, over the last 6 years, people have gone nowhere with their net pay. The gross pay actually has increased slightly, but because your taxes haven't been adjusted to take into account the effects of inflation, and even if they do so at the bottom end, they only take a half of the inflation into account. So that brings me to my next thing. Very quickly, what is South Africa got at the moment? Well, we've got a very high tax rate from a very narrow base. And if you look at it like that, we're in the top 10 highest taxed countries in the world. I leave out oil markets because oil countries normally tax very low, but there are one or two of them who don't have their own oil companies and then charge a royalty, and then it goes a bit up. But people around the world just prepare that, and so it would still put us in the top 12 or so. And you can see Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland, and Botswana are all in the top lot. But a lot of that tax comes from us. It's our excise and customs duties that go into the customs pool. And 85% of our customs pool, which ends up being about 1.1% of our GDP, goes and is transferred to those countries. So we stay in a highly taxed environment. Makes you think, hey? So what do I get back? This is just a shortened version. This is just 2 slides from mine. In South Africa, we always hear how badly our kids do at education. You've heard the PISA results and the TIMS results and so on. Well, it so turns out that it may be the fault of our children, but our children can't be that stupid. It's actually our government that's that stupid. Because if you look at it like this, the high-tax countries, and I take now the sort of Scandinavian countries, okay, they have 14 kids to a teacher. The world average is 24. We're at 32. If we leave out the fee-paying schools, it's a 34 average. Now, there's a big difference between a teacher trying to control 32 children or 34 children and 24 and 14. Would you agree with me?
Yeah.
There's much more attention that can be given and everything like that. We have 1.8 doctors per 100,000 people. The world average is 5 point something. All right, so we don't get much back. And when they talk about inequality, I can prove to you our inequality now is more than it was in 95. So ultimately, I'm saying we've had a couple of success stories. Electrification is a success story, definitely. Giving people water is probably also. Sewage is probably also. Those sort of things we have done pretty well at. We had 90% of our populations on. I mean, Eskom doing all this mess of a presentation that they had. The one little number I also just saw is another 215,000 properties got electricity. You know, that's a meaningful amount because they only do part of it because we've also got the municipalities that do as well. So there are some areas where we do okay. But I'm worried about this education story, and I think we shouldn't have put that sort of money into the tertiary education because that's not where we're going to make the big difference. We should be doing it in early childhood development, where we take the children at a lower age before they go to school, right up to grade 4. We have fewer kids per teacher there, because one that said past grade 4, they should be able to read and write. And they should be able to do simple arithmetic, in which case they already have a lot more independence. If the classes are bigger, after that, they would have a better chance of understanding and of knowing what's going on. So if we can put our attention there, but as Prof. Janssen also says, you know, maybe you need to burn something down and toddlers struggle to light those matches, apparently. So, if we got a little bit more toddlers burning nursery schools or something like that, I think the government would probably give them a bit more money. I say, let's give them a lot of firelighters and matches. Anyway, that's the background to South Africa. So I've given you something on the commodity side. I've given you where the rand, in a sense, is going to go to, because if commodity prices are not picking up and they're more likely to go down, then I think the rand is more likely to go down. I'll talk about the inflation impact of that just now, but that's where we are. But now I want to talk about the domestic economy, the part of the economy that you guys really need to take care of and think about. This is called the vanity, sanity, and reality. I'm not doing something on the mining charter now, but I will be doing a comment or two here. The first thing is, if I look at something, you know what a vanity is? Vanity in a business sense is when somebody tells you their turnover. My turnover is 10 million, you know that? I didn't tell anybody that my costs are 12 million, but my turnover is 10 million. And this excludes the banking sector and agriculture. Agriculture, because it's small companies, it's difficult to, you don't have a quarterly number for agriculture, you have a quarterly estimate, by the way. Yeah. So this, and banks and financial institutions are not included. So this is the private sector, doesn't include government, this is the private sector. So its turnover after inflation grew about 2.5%. Not bad. You need a turnover, you need that. If you don't have a turnover, you're stuffed, okay? So there you are, you've got a turnover. Our vanity is okay. But now our sanity. And here's how it works. I take the assets that a company has and the return on those assets it makes. And if the return on those assets that it makes are higher or lower than the money market rate, that is where I think the thing lines out to. Because if I'm making less than the money market rate, why should I even invest in my company? It'd be stupid. It'd be really stupid. So guess what? Here we've got it. Here's our private sector fixed capital, the blue line. I'll get out of the way, because I think it's important that you realize business are making sane decisions. When they're not making the money, they also don't invest. And you can see that this thing has been coming under pressure since 2011 and during the Great Recession. And previously, if I take this, we don't have this further back, but we had something similar called the net operating surplus. I can show you, it was quite a bit higher. So this is coming under pressure. So think about what this impact has. Yes, it has a tax impact because companies pay tax. It's the third largest part of tax normally. When they have good years, it could be the second largest, but VAT is second largest, personal income tax is largest. You know, if you take all your personal income tax, the whole country, we have just paid our civil servants. I'm glad, okay? But here, there's a bit of a pickup, which I'm glad about, the private sector fixed investment, but people only invest when there's returns. And why is that important? Well, if we take to the next level, if you really think about it, what has the best relationship with employment creation is fixed investment. Because you don't need a bus driver if you're not buying a new bus. Right? You don't need a security guard if you're not putting up a new building. Okay? You don't need another construction worker if they're not building the building. So you get the first part is obviously when you build or do something, and the second part is just the running. And you need somebody behind the computer normally. And when you're building a new bank branch, okay, this is not banks, but you're putting in the tables and everything. If you don't have the tables and the chairs, you probably don't have the staff either. Am I right? So this is the closest relationship, and this is a 50-year relationship. The data was a bit different over time, so it's spliced and diced here. It's as perfect as I can get it. Sometimes I don't think it was well recorded. For example, we had a pickup in fixed investment in the early 90s. I can understand here that the guys were still scared of the new ANC government, and there was us coming into the world, so maybe it wouldn't have gone up, but I think we underestimated it here. I think there's a bit of an underestimation here, and there's an overestimation now. But ultimately, I think this is the indicator that we know in many economies, but particularly this economy now for 50 years, from 1967, I've got this data, to the first quarter of this year. So it's just over 50 years. It has the closest relationship with formal sector employment growth. Because the informal sector, if you wish, he's not going to really invest. He's got a little table that he's taken from the side of it, and he's putting some sweets on the table and some loose cigarettes, and or he's a barber, or he's going to quickly get a welding machine and weld a few things. But ultimately, this is the thing that we want to have. Why do we want to have that? Because this is our worst. Unemployment in South Africa last year was the highest of all, the back of The Economist. It was the worst in the ILO of all the world estimates that they had, except for Gaza and the West Bank. But Gaza and the West Bank are at war, and they're not estimated to be a country. So it's safe to be, not estimated, they are not recognized as a country by the UN. So they're territory. So South Africa is the country in the world with the highest unemployment rate. We're also now the country in the world with the longest period of unemployment above 20%. You cannot address this. Obviously, you need some form of education. Obviously, you need some other factors, not just investment. You may need to think of liberalizing a bit the labor laws, but I don't think that'll make a big difference on its own. I think you've got to put a whole key range of measures in place. And I just put something on the internet you can go and look at on Twitter and so on. But, you know, in America, an economy that's 40 times our size and employs 10 times more people than us has a lower number of people unemployed. And it's taken them 6 years to wipe out 6 million, or to go from 9 million unemployed, from the broader unemployment in their case was about 15 million to about 8 million. It's taken them 6.5 years to do that. That's 6 million. For us to get rid of 9.5 million, and we're only 1/10 the size, can you imagine me going out there and saying 85 years? It's going to take us. It's not something I would want to do as a politician. It wouldn't get me elected, would it? So obviously we don't want to take away hope. I think there are things that we can do, and we can make big inroads, but we need not 3% growth for that, because our population is growing at 1.7%, so we need at least 3% so that we can start making inroads. But we need 5, 6, 7, 8% growth to make inroads into here. And that growth will only come when people have really that return on their profit, on their investment. We've got to understand that. And the world, around the world, everybody is growing quicker, or most countries are growing quicker than us, because they attract more investment, because they've got more people on the ground putting money down in firms. However, now I've got you all depressed, eh? I do also sell bullets. It's a quicker way to die than the previous way, which was razor blades. I also got suicide jackets, where you'll be met by 72 virgins hereafter. Yeah. But the only problem that they didn't tell you is that the virgins stay virgins. There's one reason why they're virgins in the first place.
Yeah. Sounds familiar.
Yeah, anyway, before we go too serious, this is the more positive part. So if I look at business in another way, and I look at the reality, and I'm a business person. I'm here every day, my shop, if you wish. And as long as I'm making money and paying my salary, all right, and I don't look at the depreciation of my computer over just 5 years, but I change that to say 7 years. This laptop must now be 7 years old. And I don't replace my desks and my chairs. So what I do is I take away depreciation, and I take away buying and selling of assets. So I just look at cash flow, in and out. And I take away inflation, because obviously I want to measure it in real terms. Then we're not too badly off. We are doing okay. So that's why businesses aren't necessarily closing down, and why they're in some cases still hiring 1 or 2 people. But we are not going to hire many people on reality. You hire people, and that's what I'm saying, on investments. You don't hire people on the reality. You stay in business because of the reality. And everybody goes through cycles. So the mining sector right now, there is no platinum mine other than maybe the one from Anglo-Plats. They say it's profitable. I don't know how they look at it. It depends on their depreciation as well, but it's very mechanical. But there's one platinum mine that's profitable. 3/4 of our gold mines are not profitable. Many of our coal mines, I don't know the percentage, but I'd say 50-50 at best are profitable. 50 are profitable, 50 are not profitable. It's tough, but why are they carrying on? Well, the management, first of all, gets paid a salary out of it. The shareholders, they can't do much because even if they sell now, there's not much they can do. They're not going to get much money, so they're hoping for better days. The workforce might get trimmed a bit, and you can get your son, but you start saying, wait a minute, the shaft, I'm going to do the maintenance, but I'm not going to replace the shaft in 10 years' time. I'm going to replace the shaft in 20 years' time. And you know what? If you want another truck down there, haven't we got those old trucks there? Can't we just make a plan? Get Jan and Sipa over there with their welding machines and put together another truck for us. And that's where our mining industry is. It's not very different for others. It's probably a lot better for others, put it that way, but it's not perfect for others. So that reality is still keeping people operating. Does that make sense to you? So this is where we are. And even people have said, you must just lower the interest rates. We cannot lower interest rates when inflation, because then I just deflated with inflation plus 1 or 2%, because I should have a risk return. And, so it doesn't matter which way you look at it. So let's just have a look. I call it the normal suspects, a couple of sectors in this country. And we can have a look at it. First of all, let's just look at rand and inflation. I said I would give you a bit of an answer here. The first thing is importers, as far as I could see, have been pricing their cars and their computers at 15 rand to the dollar for a long time. So as long as we don't go to 14.5 past there, they're going to not change their prices that often. Petrol's a different story, okay, because that gets moved on, and so is maize and 1 or 2 other items that are more transparent. But the guy selling you the Apple computer, he's lifted his prices a bit when the rand, but it's 200 rand or so. It's not much. It's maybe just to buy a bit of extra cover from the banks. Don't know. And if you look at some of the car prices, the Stats SA says car prices have gone nowhere virtually. It's a 1% gain or something for the last year. It's probably about 2-3% in the last 18 months. So I don't think that's going to go out of sync. And I think the rand will fall to about 15, but I don't think it's going to, And I do think that the rand end of next year will be a bit weaker. But ultimately, I don't think anybody is forecasting inflation breaking out of the 6% level for a while. But we must just remember the Reserve Bank has changed its track. It's important for bankers to know. They now see 4.5% as the inflation target, no longer 3 to 6. They talk about 4.5, the midpoint. It's a subtle but important shift. Here's just our growth forecasts in history. This is our population growth, by the way, the black line. Stats SA brought out new figures that says we're only growing 1.6. This is still at 1.7%. But we were growing at 1.7% for most of these years. So here you can see very much flat, stagnating, getting poorer, getting poorer, getting poorer. So 3 years of poorer. This year is now also poorer because it's semi in the bag. We're more than halfway over. We've had a very bad first quarter. So this is the 5th year in a row that we're either stagnating or getting poorer. That creates its own pressures. And remember, Mr. Ramaphosa coming in, yes, he's probably going to be better. But to turn this thing around, let's just talk about state-owned enterprises here quickly, very quickly. You can change the board. Then the board needs time to bring in a new CEO. The new CEO needs time to bring in the next level of management, the next level of management. And then they give us, and I think Eskom actually was much more honest than before. with their presentation where they said, oh, fuck, 20 billion is gone, you know, and you can swear at those numbers, I promise you. Okay? But, you know, if anybody thinks 20 billion is not much money, please be my best friend. But ultimately, these are the things that, and it takes time. And it's also, I know from other, and I'm not naming the institution, but a lot of people lived in fear of certain people in an institution that I know, government institution. And they're still not sure, because now there are court cases against this guy and everything that are going to come. Yeah. But his managers are still there. You need to get those guys out before I think a lot more dirt will come up. And in that process, it takes you a while. It's like a big ship, oil tanker turning around. Oil tanker is heavy. It can't just stop, or a train, or whatever. It takes a while. And then does it turn around? So I'm getting more and more the idea that even next year might be a little bit optimistic. And I think the private sector guys are also talking more 1.9. I'll see what they say now that the Reserve Bank has lowered its forecast for this year, and we're looking at next year. A lot more forecasts are again coming down. So next year might be the next year of stagnation. It probably will be better than this year, but we only get the real growth after the elections. And that's another thing. If you have elections, then politicians tend to say stupid things and scare the living shit out of business people. So let's have a look at the sectors in South Africa, just a few. With government increases delayed and also increases not being that big anywhere in South Africa, retail sales are coming under pressure despite interest rates having gone down twice. And I don't think interest rates are going to move anywhere. I think if it is, it's going to move 25 basis points up, and I mean in the next 18 months. I don't think there's going to be any move on interest rates for a while. Tourism should have been better. It's not bad, but the average in the world is between 6 and 8%. We seem to be more, if you average this out, between 4 and 6%. So it's a low-hanging fruit that we can change without too much money. You can allow more airlines to fly into South Africa. You can make the visa requirements easier. You can do just some paperwork between us and our customs union partners, because we give them so much money. Why just one passport, one entry? After that, everything's a domestic flight between us, Namibia, Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland, and it's easier to market a bigger area. Would you agree with me? So those are the sort of things that we've got to start thinking about to be innovative, to push it towards the 8%, 9%, 10% growth rate. And then also visa requirements. I don't care if the Palestinians are fighting the Israelis or the Pakistanis and the Indians are having a fight. In fact, they can come and calm down after the fight and have a beer in South Africa. We could have bar fights. We could have them on video on YouTube and sell them for even more advertising revenue. But anyway, the point that I want to make is in the tourism game, we shouldn't even worry about it. Okay? Who do I want to keep out? The crooks. That's it. Yeah. And I'm not talking even about petty thefts. So just another change. I showed you that motor vehicle thing. Yeah. And we think people didn't get richer, but in a way they did. But on the other end, this shows you the poor management of one certain firm called Prasa. I do this irregularly, but I decided I'm going to give you guys, because I was with the bus operators the other day, so I updated this. But I used to work as a statistician on Spoornet, And I used to count the train wheels. I'm kidding. I used to be counting passengers, so I'd get all the data from everywhere and so on. And then we were looking at about 60 million passengers a month. Okay? Now, we came down to about 50 million and then to about 45 million. And that's in 2 decades, because that was in 89. But look at this last fall from 2014 of about 45 million. Do you see that? There's 45 million. There's 2014. And now we're going under the 20 million mark. Yes, people burn trains. But definitely, we've now got older trains. We've got bad management. They outbought the train sets that are too high for the bridges. They stole the place dry or whatever. I'm just saying. So can you see what bad management does? If you get good management And remember, this is the cheapest form of transport for many poor people. The bus operator says he was getting a bit more people, but not now. In Bloemfontein, he said to me, an Afrikaans guy, he said, "Nou sien ek hoe loop die mense. They walk 12 to 20 kilometers to work." Bullshit, man. You should have a train system that works. We're subsidizing this, get proper management in and turn it around. But it doesn't turn around in a year. Not these sort of figures. I think you would agree with me. You can't take this and think, so say, dit gaan nie in 'n jaar gebeur nie. This is 5-6 years of hard work turning this around. Safety on the trains. People don't want to go to work to get stabbed, apparently. I don't know why. I just really don't understand this. I thought people wanted to get stabbed. It's free operating. Yeah, I've just taken out your kidney. Okay, now, what we need to look at here is very simply that. The manufacturing sector is, I don't think anywhere in the world it becomes bigger as a percentage of GDP. But just putting South African manufacturing in context, the OECD are the rich countries. So they're the guys that are normally in the more higher-end manufacturing, but they're losing out to the emerging markets. Specifically China. China is the factory of the world, okay? China manufactures about 30% of everything. I've told you about the cars, but if you look at trucks, there's very few European countries that still produce trucks. Sweden and Germany no longer produce trucks, even though you see Mercedes and Volvo. They're made in China. Because China does 3/4 of the world's trucks. 3/4. Every year, there's 4.5 million trucks made. 3.2 million of them are made in China. Does that put it into perspective for you? Buses are a bit different because people do the bus bodies in different parts, but the chassis are all made in China. Maybe Japan, but in India now. So you see the manufacturing. If you think of it like this, in 2010, if the emerging markets made 100 cars, they now make 145 cars. The developed countries used to make 100 cars and now make 115. We make 105. Can you see why I say we're lagging? So, Mr. Rob Davies, all your plans, all your pups and all your iPads and all your I don't know what plans you had, they have come to naught. That's the reality. And here we've got 1.2 million people working. And this is ultimately another area where you want investment. So maybe we should look at not car manufacturers because they have lots more robots, but what can we do with food? And maybe we start looking for food that's niche marketplace, like a venison product or so. Mining, excluding gold. Gold is now no longer that important to us, by the way. It's around 20% of our total mining. If you go back to the 1980s or late 1970s, it was 80%. And gold has got a different storage value. But just to give you an idea of how mining does, you can see where the world recession was. You can see where the strikes were. 2012, that was the platinum strike, where many mine workers got shot down. This was the very long platinum strike. That was a coal strike. So you can see. But even if you leave that out and one or two of the bounce backs, you start at 125, roughly speaking, or 120. See, there's 120, 125. And we end at 120, 125 in 10 years later. Mining's gone nowhere. Never mind that gold mining's gone down as well, but I mean, I'm just saying, this is... So we've got to think differently. And why is that? Because in mining, you also need a lot of certainty. If a miner comes to you and he's going to make a gold mine, he's going to lend money for a very long period of time. It takes him 7, 8, 9 years to get the hole in the ground to go to the level he needs to go if you start a new mine. And only 14 years later, 14 years from today, will the mine start breaking even. And then he's still got to pay off the debt to you guys. So for that, you need a lot of certainty. You can't come with a mining charter and chuck things around and say, now you want 25% black economic empowerment, which I'll tell you now as a con, I'll tell you why it is. And it's a very simple reason why. And then you say it's 30%. Can I tell you why BEE is a con? Because BEE is only real if you give people shares. The word beneficiary is a problem. Because I've heard of many things, and I was talking to mine workers, and I was talking to trade unionists in the chemical and in the mining arena, where these trade union guys who spew socialism become the only real shareholders. 2 or 3 of them become the only real shareholders, and then they have these nice pictures where they say, we've given 1,800 bursaries away in 20 years, if they're nice, and we've built a clinic, and we've done this. But we represent 400,000 workers, or whatever the case may be, or 100,000. It's not a big number of people that benefited. So only 480,000 of our BEE deals have we got the actual beneficiaries registered and everything as well. Do you know that? Yet we claim 11.8 million. That's why black people are also not happy with BEE, because they don't feel the benefits. Very few people feel the benefits. So it's not against anybody specific, I'm just saying. Our logistics sector, which is a coincident part of our economy, there was a bit of growth last year. I was quite surprised. But I think we must also recognize that with the agricultural bounce back, there was a lot more stuff to transport in the rural areas and to the rural areas. They could all of a sudden afford to, fill up the shops a bit, or the Spur was making money in Botawil, or whatever the case may be, and we had to deliver cutlery, or, so ultimately this was a thing. Also very commodity driven. The volume of our commodities didn't always go down, it's the prices that went down. But right now there's a bit of a fall again, and I'm a bit worried about that. I want to watch this very closely. We've got a logistics index, we're looking for a sponsorship for it. It covers 6 different modes of transport and warehousing, 5 different modes of transport and warehousing. It looks at where the economy is now for those people, and you can see that in the harbours the break bulk is coming under pressure. So in some months it's becoming crazy. You get 15 million tons of probably iron ore that go out of Saldanha, and the next month it's 1.8 million. So it's very up and down, and it's very scary.
What's the red line and the black line on there?
The one is just the trend, and the other one is the monthly. It's a bit more jittery, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I'm near the end. You're welcome to ask me questions. I'll make a couple of forecasts, and normally people have to invite me back to recorrect me. But if I look at everything, I think this year is going to be a below normal year. I think a normal year for South Africa should be at least 3%. It's going to be below population growth. It's not just the private sector economists, but more and more the Reserve Bank, government guys, and you talk to them privately, they haven't brought it down yet, and so on. The consumer is better off. She has better assets. It's all there. The debt is being paid. The net wealth, I think, is okay. Inflation is slowly moving up. Not rapidly, but it is slowly, and it will probably get close to 6%, but there's no average of 6% over a year. I don't think right now, unless we have an oil shock or something. I think the most likely 70% chance of rates staying on hold for 18 months. Growth, I think, will be slower because I don't think the VAT hike, the fuel tax increases we always get, and so on. And also I think the business confidence hasn't quite bounced back. Business people weren't quite as optimistic as consumers. I think consumers like the idea of a new president. Their confidence went up, and it's come down slightly, but no, they're still very positive. Business guys are saying, but where's the real thing? Where's the changes that you're going to bring that we need? So, and the delivery, and I'll say this, the efficient delivery. I'm not talking about developmental state, that's also a misdemeanor offense, but the efficient delivery that we need from the state-owned enterprises, whether it's electricity or rail or harbour specifically, is just not going to come in a year. It's going to take a while, and as I said, PRASA. Next year we could get closer to 2%, maybe not 2%, but let's say next year we get population growth. 1.7% would be great. I'm a bit more skeptical if we would get 2%, but I think between 1.5% and 2% would be a good judgment. I think the consumer, yes, the confidence is up, but I think there isn't going to be job growth. But I think as the consumer sort of stabilizes and even their confidence comes down, the unemployment goes up, but the consumer might start coming back because their debt levels have gone down. Even if they don't come back in the second half of next year, they'll be close to coming back. Strikes, protests continue. The one thing I've noticed is that I do a lot of work for the road freight guys. You know, we've got a new term in South Africa. Not only do we have load shedding, we have road shedding. Because roads, yesterday it was the N11. And I don't know if you know where the N11 goes, but the N11 goes past Newcastle right up to Botswana. It crosses it starts at the N3 and ends up in Botswana, but it crosses the end of the N2, the N17, the N4, and the N1. It crosses those. And that was blocked. This morning, the M57 near Olifantsfontein, Centurion, again, vehicles burnt. The R21 the day before. The R59 probably every third day now in Mfuleni and Meyerton and those areas. So that is a problem. So this is becoming a problem for some sectors. Obviously, it's also becoming, where we talked about PRASA, it's a problem for them. I think the better growth is probably still a while away. I don't think it's necessarily going to be 2.5%, but I think from now on I sense that growth is more likely to start increasing, although from this lower base, and the further out we get, the more chances you have, because if you by then, remember the state-owned enterprises are 7% of our economy. So if we get Transnet and Eskom and PRASA, or at least semi-fixed, and then there's the SABC, the NAL, SAFCOL, there's 700 state-owned enterprises. One doesn't realize it, but City Power is a state-owned enterprise. And Rand Water is an agency, Sanral is an agency. You need to fix those too. And you need to fix the funding for them. But if you get that type of stuff going, or at least turning around, not getting worse, you start feeling the positive impact in the outer years, I think, from here. So in about a year and a half's time, I think really positive stuff. Eskom's got this plan. I'm a bit more negative on the whole picture that they painted, but they think they're going to turn everything around in 1 year. I'm saying let's give them a year and a half or 2 years. It still says to me 2020, and there's no election in 2020, so you don't have politicians going completely nuts and telling us all sorts of fibs. And, that's the type of thing that we need. And I think that's where I'm a bit more positive. I also think the world is going to have a bit of a slowdown, but as we've just recently seen Trump and EU president or EU chief negotiator or whatever, now they're all saying no, they don't want to start a trade war. And I think maybe the one thing is that the Americans were always free trade people, and I think they've now realized, because their own companies, their own motor industry, their own aircraft industry are starting to talk to Trump and say, listen, we're going to lose out. So now Trump's come back and said, well, I got our gas industry, the Europeans are going to buy more of our natural gas. They're going to buy more of our soya. That was this morning's news. So I'll just say, I'm getting the reading, and obviously being far away, I get the idea that the trade war is still a possibility, and I don't know if it will happen or not. But this big word of war is the likelihood is maybe shifting, the risks are shifting down. And if that sentiment can go away, which will also take a bit of a while, we might get a bit of a slowdown in world growth in 2019 to say 3.3, which also obviously impacts us. But we see a pickup again, say, in 2020, because all these things impact, not now, they impact into the future. When he gave the 50 billion thing, it was the beginning of the year. It was only impacted in June. And the Chinese fought back in June as well. So these things take time to go through law processes and everything. So I'm hoping that happens.
I think we're going to get more sustainable trade imbalance instead of a trade war going forward, because the forces are shifting. So we are more likely to get that going forward.
Very, very true for us too. I just want to say one thing, and that's the last thing I'm going to say. I think the fruits the rotten fruits of the past are still lingering. I don't think they go away even in, say, all of them in 5 years, you know. But I do think, because I'll give you some, but the disaster is starting to be undone. But here's a part that I just want to put in your mind, that the way I think it sometimes works for normal people in the street. If everybody believes Zuma stole money, everybody tells you that. So if the cop on the N3, the traffic cop, asks you for a 200 Rand bribe, he thinks he's such small fry, he's never going to get caught. He doesn't think it's particularly wrong. He's just not giving you a fine, and he's going to take the money. Okay? So does that go away tomorrow? No. So the next step up, the official at the, let's make it Home Affairs, who says, slip me 100 Rand and your passport is here next week. That will also not sort of go away quite quickly. But the bigger the fish, I think the more easy it becomes to when you've got to turn around to. The thing that someone said to me, though, is that it's not necessarily always a straight line, that I know, but I think what he was saying to me is it's not going to be as easy as we think. We are naive in this thing. And he mentioned where he's been in Nigeria, he mentioned where he was in, I don't know, Albania, and who cares. But in places where you've got this, it takes a while. But if you can start showing the people the fruits of the fight against corruption, I think you've got a very good chance. I just think we were very naive when we saw President Ramaphosa. We all had, we were all over the moon. And I think we've now taken a step back, which is sometimes cleverer to do, and we've realized it doesn't just change like this. That's my only story. That's me done. Thank you.